The world we know is built upon layers of history, each layer designed to make us see a particular narrative, one that often erases the truth in favor of power and control. But what if the version of history we've been taught is not the full story? What if ancient secrets were buried so deep that they never truly had a chance to surface, their truths erased from our collective memory? Beneath the surface of medieval Europe, beyond the rise and fall of kings and kingdoms, exists a legacy so ancient and powerful, it might just rewrite everything we thought we knew about our past. This is the story of the Merovingians, a dynasty that once ruled vast stretches of Europe and was, for a time, considered to hold the key to divine kingship and sacred knowledge. The Merovingians were no ordinary rulers. Their dynasty was said to be the product of a supernatural bloodline, a lineage tied to ancient gods and mythical beings. They were believed to have descended directly from the biblical figure of Jesus Christ, their kingship sanctified by divine power. Their rule was marked by an air of mystery, an aura that set them apart from every other royal family of the time. But as quickly as their power rose, it was shattered. By the 8th century, they had disappeared from history almost entirely, replaced by the Carolingian dynasty and other power structures that would dominate Europe for centuries. Yet, even in their apparent extinction, the Merovingians left behind a trail of secrets that would influence history long after their fall. They may have been erased from the history books, but their bloodline, their legacy, and their hidden treasures were far from forgotten. One of the most tantalizing aspects of their history is their supposed connection to the Knights Templar, the legendary medieval order of warrior monks. The Templars, famous for their wealth and secretive nature, have long been the subject of speculation, but some believe their roots trace back to the Merovingian dynasty itself. Were the Templars protectors of an ancient bloodline? Did they guard the secrets of the Merovingians, preserving their sacred knowledge and treasures, including the most famous of all, the Holy Grail? The legend of the Holy Grail has captivated people for centuries, a symbol of divine grace and eternal life. Yet its true nature has always remained elusive. While many have sought the Grail as a physical artifact, a chalice of Christ's blood, there are those who believe the Grail is not an object, but rather a symbol, one that represents a royal bloodline capable of great power. Could it be that the Merovingians themselves were the true heirs to this legendary Grail? And if so, why have their history and legacy been so ruthlessly suppressed? The tale of the Merovingians is not just a story about kings and power. It's a story about control. Control over the past, control over the future, and control over knowledge itself. The Catholic Church, in its efforts to consolidate power during the medieval period, found it necessary to erase any challenge to its authority. And what could be a greater challenge than a bloodline believed to be directly descended from the divine? To the Church, the Merovingians represented a dangerous force, one that threatened their monopoly on religious and political power. Their legacy had to be erased, their history rewritten. But the Merovingians did not disappear completely. Theirs is a tale that has lived on in whispers, in secret societies, and in the dark corners of history. In the centuries that followed their fall, their bloodline, or at least the memory of it, seemed to resurface in various forms. Some of the most powerful secret societies in history, the Freemasons, the Priory of Chaon, and of course, the Knights Templar, are believed to have preserved the Merovingian legacy, guarding their secrets from prying eyes. Perhaps the truth has always been there, hidden in plain sight, in symbols, in rituals, and in the very structures of power that shape our world today. What we are left with, then, is a tangled web of conspiracy and mystery, a dynasty that rose to unimaginable heights and then vanished into the shadows of history. But the Merovingians were not entirely gone. Their bloodline, their symbols, and their influence are still believed by many to exist in some form, passed down through generations, concealed by the world's most powerful institutions. It is time to ask the questions that have been buried for centuries. What was the true nature of the Merovingian dynasty? What did they know, and what secrets did they guard? Were they the rightful heirs to the throne of Europe, or were they simply pawns in a much larger game? What connection did they have to the Grail? And, by extension, to the secrets of the universe itself? And perhaps most importantly, why did the Church and other powers go to such lengths to erase them from history? The answers, like the Merovingians themselves, have remained hidden for centuries, but the time may have come for the truth to be uncovered. As we dive deeper into the story of the Merovingians, we will unravel the mysteries of their reign, their fall, and their lasting influence on the world. This is not just the story of a lost dynasty. It is the story of a hidden truth that may forever change the way we understand our past and our future. The Merovingian dynasty began its rise in the dark, turbulent days of the 5th century. This was an era in which the Roman Empire had crumbled under the weight of its own decadence, leaving a fragmented Europe in chaos. Barbarian tribes roamed the continent, each seeking to carve out their own realm. Among these tribes were the Franks, a people who, though relatively unknown to the larger world, would come to dominate the region. Their story would begin not with conquest or war, but with a mystery, a bloodline that, according to legend, was destined for greatness. The founding figure of the Merovingian dynasty was a man known as Merovech, who supposedly lived around the mid-5th century. But Merovech's life is shrouded in legend. Some chroniclers suggest that he was a leader of the Salian Franks, a tribe who had recently arrived in the Roman Empire's fractured borders. Others claim that his lineage was far more ancient, tracing back to a divine origin. According to one theory, Merovech himself was the product of a union between his mother, a woman of royal descent, and a mysterious sea creature, a powerful symbol of the dynasty's supposed connection to the divine. This supernatural origin story is not unique to the Merovingians. It echoes the kind of mythical narratives surrounding other royal families throughout history, suggesting that the Merovingians saw themselves as far more than mere mortals. They were kings not by accident, but by divine right, chosen by the gods or the forces of destiny to rule over the lands that would eventually become France. This concept of divine kingship was central to the Merovingian identity. They were not simply rulers of men. They were mediators between the earthly realm and the celestial, the living embodiment of divine will. Merovech's son, Childeric I, would carry this sacred kingship into the next phase of the dynasty's rise. Childeric, like his father, was a formidable warrior, but it is his role in establishing the foundations of the Merovingian kingdom that remains crucial. The Franks were still considered a barbarian tribe in many respects, caught between the lingering influence of Roman rule and the emerging power of the various Germanic kingdoms. Childeric, however, successfully united several Frankish tribes and established the Merovingians as a dominant force. His reign, though somewhat obscure in the historical record, laid the groundwork for what would become the Frankish Empire. Childeric's most famous act, however, was his alliance with the Catholic Church. In the mid-5th century, Christianity was spreading rapidly across Europe, following the collapse of the Roman Empire. But the Catholic Church was not yet the all-powerful force it would become in later centuries. It was still fighting to solidify its influence over pagan tribes and other competing religious practices. The Merovingians recognized early on that aligning themselves with the Church would not only legitimize their rule in the eyes of the people, but also provide them with a powerful ally. In return for the Church's blessings, the Merovingian kings would secure their power in a fragmented world. Childeric's son, Clovis I, is often considered the true founder of the Merovingian dynasty's legacy. His reign, beginning in 481 CE, marked the start of a new era for the Franks. By the time of his death in 511 CE, Clovis had united nearly all the Frankish tribes under his banner, establishing what would become the first truly unified Frankish kingdom. But Clovis's true significance lies in his conversion to Christianity, a move that would shape the course of European history for centuries to come. Clovis's conversion to Christianity was not just a personal decision. It was a political maneuver of monumental importance. At the time, most of Europe was still deeply divided along religious lines. The Western Roman Empire had long since fallen, and its former territories were now home to a mix of pagan, Arian Christian, and Orthodox Christian factions. Clovis, in choosing to embrace Orthodox Christianity, aligned himself with the Catholic Church and, by extension, with Rome itself. This decision would give the Merovingians legitimacy in the eyes of the Christian world, and they would go on to be recognized as the protectors of the faith, as well as rulers of the Western Christian world. But the conversion of Clovis, while politically astute, also had a deep symbolic meaning. It suggested that the Merovingians were not merely kings, but divinely chosen rulers, anointed by God to lead the Christian world. This connection between divine kingship and the Merovingian bloodline would become a cornerstone of their identity. The Church's favor not only helped the Merovingians gain power, but solidified their status as the rightful heirs of Christian Europe, further entwining their destiny with the divine. As the Merovingian kingdom grew, so too did the legend of their kings. The dynasty's rulers, known as the long-haired kings, were said to possess supernatural abilities, with their long, flowing hair symbolizing their connection to divine power. This physical marker, the long hair of the Merovingian kings, was seen as a reflection of their royal status, a mark of the divine right to rule. It is said that the longer the king's hair, the greater his power and divine favor. This belief in the sacredness of the Merovingian kingship was not simply a matter of political propaganda. It was a deeply ingrained part of their identity. The Merovingians ruled for nearly 3 centuries, during which they oversaw a period of relative stability and expansion. However, the dynasty's power was not absolute. Despite their religious legitimacy and divine status, the Merovingian kings often faced challenges from within their own kingdom. By the 7th century, the kings began to lose control over their territories, with regional nobles and mayors of the palace increasingly gaining influence. The rulers of the dynasty, once seen as semi-divine figures, became more like figureheads, while the real power lay in the hands of the aristocracy. The decline of the Merovingians was not abrupt, but rather a slow erosion of power that played out over generations. Their sacred kingship, once the bedrock of their rule, began to lose its luster as the dynasty's rulers became weaker and more disconnected from the practical realities of governance. Eventually, the Merovingian dynasty would fall, not in a blaze of glory, but in a quiet coup that saw the Carolingians, a rival family, take the throne. Despite their fall from power, the legacy of the Merovingians did not simply disappear. The idea of their divine kingship, their sacred bloodline, and their connection to the Holy Grail and the ancient gods remained a powerful force, one that would resonate throughout European history for centuries to come. Even after the end of their reign, the Merovingians continued to haunt the imaginations of those who sought to uncover the mysteries of their time. And so, the story of the Merovingians is not just the tale of a lost dynasty. It is the story of a kingdom whose rulers believe themselves to be the heirs of a divine legacy, a kingdom whose influence reached far beyond the borders of their realm and whose secrets have yet to be fully uncovered. It is a story of power, mystery, and the eternal struggle to preserve one's legacy against the forces that would seek to erase it. The Merovingian kings were not simply rulers of men, but were believed to be kings of divine descent. Their bloodline, according to legend, was far from ordinary. It was sacred, a gift from the heavens, passed down through the ages from a time when gods walked among men. The title of sanguine kings, meaning blood kings, was not merely an honorific. It was an expression of the belief that the Merovingians carried within them a divine and immortal lineage, one that connected them to the very foundation of Christianity and beyond. The idea of a sacred bloodline has existed in various forms throughout history, often tied to the idea of kings being chosen by divine providence. The Merovingians, however, were unique in that they claimed to be descended directly from a supernatural union, a claim that elevated them far above other royal families. The most famous of these theories suggests that the Merovingians were descended from none other than Jesus Christ himself, or more precisely, from his earthly bloodline. This idea, though controversial, has gained traction over the years, fueled by secretive traditions and hidden texts that point to the possibility that the Merovingians were the living heirs of Christ's lineage. The myth of the sacred bloodline of Jesus Christ is rooted in the belief that Christ was married to Mary Magdalene, and together they had children. These descendants, often referred to as the Merovingian bloodline in later legends, will be the rightful heirs to both the spiritual and political authority that Christ held. According to some theories, these descendants, protected by a secret society, would eventually give rise to the Merovingian dynasty, whose kings carried the sacred blood of Christ. The historical roots of this claim are nebulous at best. There is no concrete evidence that Jesus was married or had children, nor that Mary Magdalene was anything more than a follower of Christ. However, the Merovingian kings' claim to divine ancestry goes beyond mere speculation. It was a foundational element of their rule. This belief in their sacred origin was central to their identity as rulers, and they made no effort to hide their connection to the divine. The concept of divine kingship was an essential part of the Merovingian worldview, one that placed them far above the ordinary concerns of mortals. The bloodline was not only important for its connection to Christ, but also for the power it granted its bearers. In the ancient world, blood was believed to carry power, the power of gods, kings, and warriors. A divine bloodline was synonymous with divine authority, and those who carried it were seen as god-kings, chosen by higher powers to rule over the earth. For the Merovingians, this divine power was symbolized in the most sacred of ways: their long, flowing hair. The long-haired kings, as they were often called, wore their hair as a physical manifestation of their royal and divine right to rule. The longer the king's hair, the greater his power, and by extension, the closer he was to the divine. This belief in the sacred nature of the Merovingian bloodline was further bolstered by the stories that surrounded their kings. It was said that the Merovingian monarchs could perform miracles, heal the sick, and command the loyalty of their followers with an almost otherworldly presence. These supernatural abilities were attributed to their divine heritage, evidence to their supporters that the gods truly favored their rule. The idea that the Merovingians were not only rulers of men, but also agents of divine power, was deeply embedded in the culture of their reign. But why, then, did such a powerful dynasty fall into obscurity? If the Merovingians were truly the divine heirs to the Christian throne, how could they be erased from history? This is where the story of their downfall becomes just as significant as their rise. The Merovingians' extraordinary claim to divine kingship and their unique bloodline set them on a collision course with the institutions that would come to dominate medieval Europe. The Catholic Church, which saw itself as the sole authority on all matters of divinity and kingship. The Church, in its quest to consolidate power, found the Merovingians' claim to divine authority a threat to its own monopoly on spiritual and temporal power. As the Merovingians' power grew, so did the Church's fear of their influence. The idea that the Merovingians might hold the key to a divine bloodline that could rival the Church's claim to earthly authority was too dangerous to ignore. The Church, with its vast resources and influence, took steps to suppress the Merovingians, both politically and ideologically. As the Merovingians' political power waned in the 7th century, so too did their claim to divine kingship. In the end, they were replaced by the Carolingians, a family whose rise was supported by the Church, and whose connection to the Merovingians was largely erased from the historical record. But despite their fall from power, the Merovingians' legacy did not die with them. The belief in their sacred bloodline, and the idea that they were the heirs to a divine kingdom, persisted in the shadows, passed down through secret societies and hidden traditions. The notion of a divine bloodline that could trace its roots back to Christ continued to haunt the imaginations of those who sought to uncover the true history of Europe's royal families. The idea that the Merovingians were the true heirs to a divine throne would not be forgotten. It would merely go underground, preserved by those who understood the power of secrecy and the weight of history. In the centuries that followed the Merovingians' fall, the idea of a hidden bloodline, one that connected the royal families of Europe to the divine, would come to play a key role in the legends of the Holy Grail. The Grail, often described as the vessel that held the blood of Christ, became a symbol not only of divine grace, but of the bloodline itself. Some believe that the Merovingians, as the true heirs of Christ's bloodline, were the protectors of the Grail, guarding its secrets from those who would use it for power. The Grail, in this sense, is not just an artifact, but a metaphor for the divine bloodline, the true inheritance of kings. As centuries passed, the legends of the Merovingian bloodline began to merge with other myths, creating a tapestry of esoteric lore that would come to define the search for the Holy Grail and the secrets of the ancient world. The notion that a divine bloodline still existed in Europe, hidden from the public eye, was passed down through generations of mystics, secret societies, and even royal families who saw themselves as the rightful heirs to a hidden legacy. Today, the myth of the Merovingian bloodline continues to captivate the modern imagination. The idea that the Merovingians were the true rulers of Europe, descended from the divine and protectors of ancient secrets, has inspired countless books, films, and conspiracy theories. But the question remains, what is the truth behind these claims? Was there really a divine bloodline that the Merovingians carried? And if so, why was it suppressed? And what secrets did they protect that could still have an impact on the world today? The story of the Merovingians is not just one of kings and kingdoms. It is a story of blood, power, and divine destiny. It is a tale of rulers who believed they were destined for greatness, chosen by the gods to carry a sacred legacy. The Merovingians were more than just kings. They were the guardians of an ancient and powerful secret, a secret that has never fully been revealed, and one that continues to haunt the pages of history. The Merovingian dynasty, which had once ruled with divine authority and commanded the loyalty of its subjects, began to crumble under the weight of its own internal divisions. The very bloodline that had been hailed as divine, a direct connection to the gods themselves, seemed to lose its mystique as political struggles, corruption, and infighting overtook the kingdom. What had once been a strong, unified realm of the Franks fractured into smaller, weaker kingdoms, and the once great Merovingian kings became mere figureheads, their power eclipsed by the rise of new political forces. The origins of the Merovingian decline can be traced back to the 7th century, when the dynasty's control over its vast territories began to wane. The empire, which had been built on the idea of a divine, sacred kingship, could no longer maintain the same level of cohesion that had once made it so formidable. The monarchy became increasingly ineffective as the Merovingian kings, once seen as the powerful intermediaries between the divine and the mortal realms, began to lose control over their kingdom's regional nobles. By the middle of the 7th century, the monarchy had grown weak, and much of the power was being held by the mayors of the palace, high-ranking officials who were technically subordinates to the king, but in practice held significant authority. This shift in power dynamics was particularly evident in the later years of the Merovingian reign. The most influential of these mayors was Pepin of Herstal, a powerful Frankish noble who, by the late 7th century, had essentially become the de facto ruler of the kingdom, though he was still nominally serving under the Merovingian kings. The kings, who had once been revered as god-kings, now found themselves entirely powerless, their influence reduced to mere ceremonial appearances. In the end, the Merovingians became little more than puppets, controlled by the very officials who were supposed to serve them. As the Merovingians lost their grip on power, the mayors of the palace began to vie for control over the kingdom, laying the groundwork for what would eventually become a complete overthrow of the dynasty. The political climate was further exacerbated by the fact that the Merovingians, unlike other ruling families, were deeply invested in the idea of their divine kingship. Their very identity was tied to the notion that they were chosen by God to rule, and their bloodline was considered sacred. But as their political power crumbled, this sacred identity could not hold the kingdom together. Their divine right was questioned, their once unassailable position eroded by the shifting tides of power. One of the key figures in this power struggle was Pepin the Short, the son of Pepin of Herstal. Pepin the Short, after a series of military successes and political maneuvering, eventually managed to secure the support of the Frankish nobles and declare himself the ruler of the Franks. In 751 CE, With the backing of the church, Pepin the Short deposed the last Merovingian king, Childeric III, and replaced him with his own family, founding the Carolingian dynasty. This marked the official end of the Merovingian reign and the beginning of a new chapter in Frankish history. But the fall of the Merovingians was not simply a result of internal strife or political maneuvering. It was also the product of a conspiracy that sought to erase their legacy. The church played a crucial role in the collapse of the Merovingians, as it had long been at odds with the dynasty's divine claims. While the Merovingians had originally aligned themselves with the church, securing its blessing for their rule, the power dynamics had shifted. By the time of Pepin the Short, the Catholic Church had grown significantly in power, and its leaders had begun to see themselves as the true spiritual and temporal rulers of Europe. The Church's support was key in Pepin's rise, and in return, Pepin granted the Church land and influence, further strengthening its grip on Europe. The deposition of the last Merovingian king, Childeric III, is surrounded by intrigue and suspicion. Childeric, who had been held as a prisoner by the Carolingians, was forced to give up his royal title and was sent into exile. While the official narrative was that he had been peacefully deposed, some historians suggest that his fall was the result of a well-coordinated plot to eliminate any potential rivals to the Carolingians. The fact that Childeric was not executed, but rather allowed to live out his days in obscurity, only adds to the mystery. Was his removal a political necessity, or was it part of a larger conspiracy to erase the Merovingian legacy entirely? The role of the Church in this conspiracy is particularly significant. The Catholic Church, which had initially aligned itself with the Merovingians, was now firmly in the camp of the Carolingians. The Church had long been wary of the Merovingians' claim to divine kingship and had likely seen their rise as a threat to its own power. The Church's support of Pepin the Short and the Carolingians was, in part, a strategic move to consolidate its own authority over Europe. The Church had become an increasingly powerful institution, and aligning itself with the Carolingians allowed it to further its own interests at the expense of the Merovingians. At the heart of the conspiracy to dethrone the Merovingians was the desire to create a new order in Europe, one in which the power of the Church and the monarchy were more closely aligned. The Carolingians, with their strong ties to the Church, seemed to offer a solution to this problem. By placing a Carolingian king on the throne, the Church could ensure that its influence over European politics would be firmly established. This alliance would ultimately lead to the establishment of the Holy Roman Empire, a powerful political entity that would shape the future of Europe for centuries to come. But the Merovingian dynasty, despite its fall, did not disappear without a trace. In the years following their overthrow, their bloodline continued to attract attention. Conspiracy theorists and occultists have long maintained that the Merovingians were not truly gone, but were instead hiding in the shadows, guarding secrets that could change the course of history. Some believe that the true descendants of the Merovingians still exist today, their bloodline hidden from the public eye, their power and influence lurking in the background of European politics. The idea that the Merovingians were the true rulers of Europe, with a divine mandate to lead, has persisted for centuries. The conspiracy to erase their legacy, whether through political maneuvering, the shifting balance of power, or the manipulation of religious institutions, has given rise to countless theories and legends. Were the Merovingians the true heirs to the Holy Grail, protectors of an ancient and powerful secret? Did the Church's involvement in their downfall extend beyond mere politics? These questions continue to fascinate and intrigue those who believe that the Merovingian legacy was never fully erased, only hidden. As the centuries passed, the Merovingian dynasty's fall became one of the great mysteries of European history. Was it a simple case of political power slipping away, or was it part of a larger conspiracy to suppress a royal bloodline that could have rivaled the Church itself? The mystery of the Merovingian fall has fueled generations of scholars, historians, and conspiracy theorists, and it is a mystery that, for many, remains unresolved. What we do know is that the Merovingians, with their sacred bloodline and divine right to rule, were a force to be reckoned with. and their fall, whether orchestrated or inevitable, marked the end of an era in European history, an era that continues to captivate the imagination of those who seek the truth behind the shadows of the past. The Knights Templar, one of the most enigmatic and powerful medieval orders, have long been associated with hidden knowledge, vast wealth, and secretive rituals. To many, the Templars are a symbol of an ancient and mysterious tradition that has transcended centuries. But their origins, their true mission, and their ties to the forces of power and secrecy remain clouded in mystery. Could the Templars, whose rise in the early 12th century transformed the course of European history, be linked to an earlier, more ancient dynasty, the Merovingians? At first glance, the Templars may appear to be disconnected from the long-fallen Merovingians. The Templars, founded in 1119, came at a time when the Merovingians had long since been erased from history, their power overthrown by the Carolingian centuries earlier. Yet, as we peer deeper into the shadowy depths of medieval history, an intriguing possibility emerges. What if the Templars were not only aware of the Merovingians, but were, in fact, their spiritual heirs? What if the Templars, whose role in European politics and religious life was so significant, were guardians of an ancient secret, the bloodline of the Merovingians, and with it, the Holy Grail itself? The Templars' origins are famously tied to the Crusades and the establishment of their order in the aftermath of the First Crusade, where a small group of knights pledged themselves to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem. Their humble beginnings, however, belied the immense power they would eventually come to wield. Within a century of their founding, the Templars had grown into one of the wealthiest and most influential organizations in Europe, with vast holdings of land and treasure stretching from Scotland to the Holy Land. They developed a unique system of banking and financial management, which earned them the trust and fear of kings and popes alike. The Templars' rapid ascent raised questions about the true nature of their mission. What did they know? What had they discovered during their time in Jerusalem? And why did they rise to such prominence so quickly? The answer, many believe, lies not in the Templars' military exploits, but in their connection to the ancient secrets that lay hidden beneath the surface of European history. For some, the Templars were not just warrior monks, but custodians of an even greater secret, one that had been passed down from an older and more powerful dynasty, the Merovingians. In this view, the Templars did not merely serve as protectors of Christian pilgrims. They were the guardians of the Merovingian bloodline, tasked with protecting the descendants of this sacred dynasty and their ancient knowledge. This theory is further supported by the fact that the Templars had an intense interest in the Holy Land and the relics they uncovered there, including, potentially, the Holy Grail. Could the Holy Grail, an artifact that has captivated the imagination for centuries, be more than just a cup or chalice? What if, instead, it was a symbol of royal blood, a representation of the sacred lineage of the Merovingians, and by extension, a symbol of divine kingship? Some believe that the Templars, in their expeditions to Jerusalem, uncovered evidence that the Merovingians were indeed the true heirs to the bloodline of Christ, and that this knowledge was preserved and protected by the Templar order. In this view, the Grail is not merely a religious relic, but a key to understanding the true nature of European monarchy, power, and sacred kingship. To understand the connection between the Merovingians and the Templars, we must first look at the political and religious landscape of the time. The Catholic Church, which had slowly solidified its dominance over medieval Europe, had long been suspicious of the Merovingians' claim to divine kingship. The Merovingians, with their unique bloodline and their connection to ancient, mystical traditions, represented a challenge to the Church's authority, and so they were systematically erased from the historical record. However, their legacy did not entirely disappear. Over time, fragments of this ancient knowledge resurfaced, preserved by secretive groups and individuals who sought to maintain the hidden truths of the past. The Templars, whose rise coincided with the height of the Church's power, were in a unique position to access these ancient truths. It is believed by some that the Templars were initiated into esoteric traditions that had been passed down through generations, traditions that included the lore of the Merovingians and their sacred bloodline. The Templars' interest in the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, and other ancient artifacts may have been less about religious relics and more about securing the secrets of a lost royal lineage. In this sense, the Templars could be seen as the protectors not just of Christianity, but of a much older, more esoteric history that the Church would rather have remained buried. One of the key pieces of evidence often cited by proponents of this theory is the Templars' mysterious and highly secretive nature. The Templars were an order that operated outside the normal boundaries of medieval society. They were independent, operating with the approval of the Pope, but not under the direct control of any monarch. Their financial empire allowed them to travel freely across Europe and the Holy Land, and they maintained a network of contacts that spanned the continent. They also held considerable influence with various European rulers, which allowed them to operate with relative impunity. This autonomy, combined with their access to hidden knowledge, makes them a natural candidate for having inherited the guardianship of the Merovingian legacy. Another intriguing link between the Merovingians and the Templars comes in the form of the Priory of Chaon, a secret society that allegedly traces its origins to the Merovingians. The Priory of Chaon is often associated with the Templars in conspiracy theories and claims to have protected the secret of the Merovingian bloodline for centuries. According to some accounts, the Priory of Chaon was tasked with ensuring that the Merovingian lineage survived, even after the fall of the dynasty. The priory's name itself suggests a connection to the ancient, sacred hills of Chaon, which some believe were once home to the last descendants of the Merovingians. The connection between the priory and the Templars remains highly speculative, but the possibility that both groups were working to preserve the same ancient knowledge cannot be easily dismissed. As the Templars grew in power and wealth, they became a significant force in medieval Europe, and with their rise came increasing suspicion. The Templars' secrecy, their immense wealth, and their connections to powerful political and religious figures made them both admired and feared. In 1307, King Philip IV of France, who was deeply indebted to the Templars and jealous of their power, launched a brutal campaign against the order. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, hundreds of Templars were arrested, tortured, and executed, and the order was officially disbanded. But the secrets they carried did not disappear. According to many theories, the Templars did not vanish into obscurity. Instead, they went underground, continuing their work in secret, preserving the knowledge they had uncovered and passing it on to future generations. The fall of the Templars marked the end of one chapter in their mysterious history, but their shadow still looms large over Europe. The idea that the Templars were connected to the Merovingians has fueled countless conspiracy theories, novels, and films, most famously in Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code. Whether or not the Templars were indeed guardians of the Merovingian bloodline, their role in history is undeniable. They were a secretive, powerful organization whose true mission remains the subject of endless speculation. Did they protect the sacred bloodline of the Merovingians? Were they guardians of the Holy Grail, not as a physical object, but as a symbol of divine kingship? The answers to these questions remain elusive, but one thing is certain. The Templars were more than just a medieval order of knights. They were, in the eyes of many, the last hope for a hidden, esoteric truth, a truth that tied the fate of European royalty, the mysteries of the Grail, and the legacy of the Merovingians together in a web of secrets that continues to intrigue and fascinate to this day. For centuries, the true history of the Merovingians has been obscured, deliberately hidden by those in power who sought to suppress the evidence of their sacred and divine right to rule. However, as is often the case with ancient mysteries, the truth has a way of resurfacing, sometimes in the form of obscure documents, secret manuscripts, or long-forgotten artifacts that seem to offer tantalizing glimpses into a world that was intentionally buried. These chronicles, though often dismissed as legend or myth, have remained a powerful thread in the tapestry of Merovingian history, offering clues that hint at a hidden past, one that involves royal bloodlines, secret societies, and knowledge that has long been kept from the public eye. Perhaps one of the most significant pieces of evidence linking the Merovingians to a larger, more mysterious historical narrative is the presence of certain ancient texts and manuscripts that have been preserved throughout the centuries. These texts, often written in obscure languages or encoded in mysterious ways, appear to contain knowledge that was never meant to be shared. They suggest that the Merovingian kings were not simply rulers of the Franks, but heirs to an even older and more sacred tradition, one that was tied to the ancient mysteries of Europe and possibly even beyond. One of the most notable documents in this context is the Chronicles of the Merovingian Kings. This manuscript, which dates back to the early Middle Ages, contains a detailed history of the dynasty and its rulers, including information that was intentionally omitted from official church records. Though only fragments of the original text remain, what we do know is that the Chronicles paint a picture of the Merovingians as a dynasty that had deep, esoteric knowledge that was passed down through generations of kings who believed themselves to be the rightful heirs to a divine throne. The manuscript's obscure origins have led many to speculate that it was not just a simple royal history, but a guide to the spiritual practices and beliefs of the Merovingians, revealing their connection to the ancient gods and the hidden mysteries of the world. Equally important are the enigmatic texts attributed to early Merovingian scholars and priests, works that have been discovered in various religious libraries across Europe. These texts, which often blend religious teachings with occult knowledge, suggest that the Merovingians had access to a much broader range of spiritual and philosophical teachings than was officially sanctioned by the Church. In particular, some of these texts reference the sacred bloodline, hinting at a royal family that was divinely chosen, not only to rule over the Franks, but to guard a deeper, more powerful secret. This secret, according to the texts, was hidden in plain sight, encoded in the symbols, rituals, and holy relics that the Merovingians kept close to their hearts. One of the most intriguing aspects of these texts is the frequent mention of the vessel of the blood, a reference that many believe is tied to the Holy Grail. According to some interpretations, the Grail was not just a physical object, but a symbol of the sacred Merovingian bloodline itself, a lineage that was said to carry the blood of Christ. These references to the vessel suggest that the Merovingians saw themselves not just as political rulers, but as the true spiritual heirs to Christ's throne on earth. The notion that the Grail could be an abstract, spiritual concept rather than a tangible relic is a theory that has been explored by many scholars. But it is within the context of the Merovingians that it gains its greatest significance. The vessel of the blood may well have been a metaphor for the royal bloodline, a sacred inheritance that connected the Merovingians to the divine. Another set of important documents tied to the Merovingian legacy are the Carolingian charters, which were written in the period immediately after the fall of the Merovingians and the rise of the Carolingians. These charters, which were issued by the new Carolingian rulers, sought to legitimize their rule by referencing the old Merovingian kings. What's particularly interesting about these charters is the subtle ways in which they acknowledge the continued importance of the Merovingian bloodline, even as it was being erased from power. Some of these documents even suggest that the Carolingians were conscious of the hidden truths associated with the Merovingian kings, and that they sought to keep those truths in the hands of a select few, while publicly erasing the dynasty's claim to the throne. But perhaps the most tantalizing discoveries in the quest for the Merovingian legacy are the various artifacts that have surfaced over the centuries. Relics that appear to connect the Merovingian dynasty to both the Christian faith and the ancient mysteries of the world. Among the most famous of these artifacts is the Merovingian cross, a sacred object that has been passed down through generations of the French aristocracy. The cross, which is said to date back to the 6th century, bears intricate carvings and symbols that are not found in typical Christian crosses. Some scholars believe that the symbols represent a hidden spiritual tradition, one that was deeply connected to the Merovingian bloodline and its divine right to rule. The cross itself has been the subject of much debate, with some claiming it was a gift from the early Christian church, while others argue that it was part of a more ancient and esoteric tradition. Another important artifact is the Chalice of Clovis, a relic that is said to have been used by the first Merovingian king, Clovis I, during his conversion to Christianity. This chalice, believed to be a direct connection to the Holy Grail, was thought to have been lost to history, but recent discoveries have suggested that it may still exist in hidden collections across Europe. According to legend, the chalice was imbued with the power to confer divine favor upon its holder, another indication of the Merovingians' belief in their sacred, divine right to rule. The chalice, much like the Grail, was seen as a symbol not only of Christ's blood, but of the royal Merovingian bloodline. Whether or not this artifact holds the secret to the Merovingian legacy is unknown, but its connection to the Grail and its historical significance make it a crucial part of the puzzle. As these texts and artifacts have resurfaced, a new wave of interest has emerged surrounding the lost bloodline of the Merovingians. Scholars, historians, and conspiracy theorists alike have flocked to these discoveries, seeking answers to the questions that have long haunted Europe's royal history. The documents and relics tell a story of a dynasty that was once at the pinnacle of power, whose rulers claimed divine descent, and whose legacy was systematically erased by those who feared the power that such a lineage could wield. But the story of the Merovingians is not just a tale of lost kings and forgotten relics. It is also a story of a hidden truth that refuses to die. The very fact that these documents and artifacts continue to emerge after centuries of suppression suggests that the truth of the Merovingians' divine right to rule has not been fully buried. Whether by design or by fate, the legacy of the Merovingians continues to haunt the history of Europe, a legacy that is tied to secret knowledge, sacred relics, and a bloodline that has never truly faded from the world's consciousness. The hidden chronicles, documents, and artifacts of the Merovingian dynasty do more than simply offer glimpses into a lost past. They point to a deeper, more profound truth about power, divinity, and legacy. And as we continue to uncover these pieces of history, the question remains, will the true nature of the Merovingian bloodline ever be fully revealed, or will it remain one of history's greatest mysteries? Throughout history, secret societies have played an enigmatic and often crucial role in shaping the course of events behind the scenes. These societies, which operate under a veil of secrecy and often with hidden agendas, have long been associated with the preservation and transmission of esoteric knowledge. For centuries, they have been accused of wielding vast influence, manipulating political outcomes, and guarding powerful secrets. Among the most intriguing questions is whether any of these secret organizations are connected to the legendary Merovingian dynasty and the ancient bloodlines that once ruled Europe with divine authority. Could it be that some of the world's most famous secret societies were founded to protect, preserve, or perhaps even resurrect the hidden legacy of the Merovingians? To explore this question is to enter the shadowy world of Freemasons, the Priory of Chaon, the Rosicrucians, and other mysterious orders whose activities, though often considered esoteric and obscure, may hold the key to unraveling the secrets of the Merovingian bloodline. One of the most well-known secret societies tied to the Merovingian narrative is the Priory of Chaon, a name that has captivated the public's imagination for decades, especially following its mention in Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code. According to various accounts, the Priory of Chaon was an ancient order that dates back to the time of the Merovingians and is thought to have played a pivotal role in protecting their legacy. The priory, it is believed, was formed to safeguard the bloodline of the Merovingians, especially following the dynasty's downfall and the rise of the Carolingians. This secret society purportedly kept a detailed genealogical record of the Merovingian descendants, ensuring that the true heirs to the throne were protected from the prying eyes of the church and the growing power of the Carolingian dynasty. The exact origins of the Priory of Chaon remain shrouded in mystery, with competing theories about its founding. Some historians believe that the order was established in the 11th century, while others trace its roots back to the time of the Merovingians themselves, suggesting that the priory was not only a guardian of the royal bloodline, but also the keeper of their esoteric and spiritual knowledge. It is said that the priory's primary mission was to safeguard the so-called Grail secret, which some claim was closely tied to the Merovingian family and their sacred bloodline. The idea that the Merovingians were direct descendants of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene is at the heart of this myth, with the Priory of Chaon purportedly acting as its guardians. The priory's connection to the Merovingians is further solidified by the claim that many influential European families are descended from this secret order. The notion that a hidden aristocracy, bearing the true bloodline of Christ, exists in Europe has become a cornerstone of conspiracy theories surrounding the priory. According to these theories, the priory not only preserved the Merovingian lineage but also ensured that their descendants would eventually regain their rightful place on the European throne. Some versions of the story even suggest that the priory was involved in the formation of the Holy Roman Empire and later the dynastic families of France, Spain, and England. Though the historical evidence for the existence of the Priory of Chaon remains largely speculative, the idea of a clandestine organization protecting a royal bloodline has gained considerable traction, especially among those who believe in the notion of a hidden history, one that has been suppressed by the powers that be. These secret societies, such as the Priory of Chaon, have often been accused of shaping history in ways that remain invisible to the public eye. And within this secretive realm, the idea of the Merovingians as divine rulers, with their bloodline encoded into the very structure of European aristocracy, continues to capture the imagination. Another powerful secret society that may have connections to the Merovingian legacy is the Freemasons. This centuries-old society, often seen as a fraternity that deals in moral and philosophical teachings, has been the subject of countless theories regarding its role in shaping history. The Freemasons, with their complex symbols, secret rituals, and deep-rooted ties to European nobility, have long been suspected of harboring knowledge about ancient royal bloodlines, including the Merovingians. Some have even suggested that the Freemasons are the modern-day guardians of the sacred Merovingian bloodline, working in the shadows to ensure its survival and eventual resurgence. The Freemasons are often associated with a range of esoteric traditions, including the teachings of the Rosicrucians, an even older secret society whose origins trace back to the early 17th century. The Rosicrucians, like the Freemasons, were interested in hidden knowledge, particularly in the realms of alchemy, mysticism, and spiritual enlightenment. Some theories suggest that the Rosicrucians were tasked with guarding ancient secrets that date back to the time of the Merovingians, particularly the lore surrounding the Holy Grail, the divine bloodline, and the true history of Europe's royal families. The Freemasons and the Rosicrucians, along with other secret societies such as the Knights Templar, discussed earlier in this narrative, are often seen as part of an interconnected web of hidden organizations whose collective goal is to preserve and protect the true royal bloodline. These societies, according to certain esoteric traditions, are believed to possess knowledge of an ancient, divine kingship that is far older than what is officially recognized by history. The connection between these secret societies and the Merovingians is often subtle, but in the minds of many esoteric scholars, it is unmistakable. It is important to note that while much of the evidence for these connections is speculative and circumstantial, the enduring power of these myths speaks to the allure of hidden knowledge and lost legacies. The idea that secret societies, operating under the radar of mainstream history, have maintained a continuous thread of royal bloodlines, esoteric wisdom, and occult traditions is one that has persisted for centuries. These societies, while publicly benign or focused on moral philosophy, have always carried with them a sense of mystery and intrigue, leading many to believe that they are the keepers of truths that the rest of the world is not ready to comprehend. For example, some Freemason lodges are said to have intricate carvings and symbols that trace their roots to the ancient world, some of which may reference the Merovingian dynasty and its claimed connection to divine kingship. In these societies, knowledge is often passed down in secretive rites and ceremonies, with initiates progressing through different levels of understanding. It is said that at the highest levels of initiation, members may gain access to the most guarded of knowledge that includes the hidden history of the Merovingians and their sacred lineage. The idea that the Merovingian bloodline, long suppressed by the rise of the Carolingians and the dominance of the Catholic Church, has been quietly preserved by these secret societies presents an intriguing and captivating vision of history. In this view, The Merovingians are not a forgotten dynasty, but a bloodline that continues to exist in secret, hidden from the prying eyes of the public, protected by powerful organizations that have a vested interest in maintaining their legacy. Whether or not these claims hold any truth is still a matter of intense debate, but the concept of an underground movement to preserve the bloodline of Christ's descendants is undeniably compelling. As we look deeper into the hidden history of the Merovingians, we find ourselves confronted with a complex web of interconnected myths, secret societies, and esoteric knowledge. The Merovingian legacy, far from being erased by the rise of the Carolingians, may have been preserved, just out of sight, under the cover of secret societies whose members understood the value of safeguarding this ancient and divine bloodline. These societies, which continue to shape history in subtle ways, are the true heirs to the Merovingian crown, their influence extending far beyond what is visible on the surface. What remains to be uncovered is the full extent of their involvement in shaping the course of European history and whether their hidden agendas will ever be fully revealed. In the age of modern technology and advanced archaeological methods, the quest to uncover the secrets of the Merovingian dynasty has taken on a new dimension. With the advent of digital archives, DNA testing, and state-of-the-art research techniques, scholars and enthusiasts alike are delving deeper into the mysteries surrounding this enigmatic bloodline. The Merovingians, once thought to be a forgotten dynasty, are now the subject of renewed interest as new discoveries, obscure documents, and even genealogical studies seem to suggest that the story of their legacy may not be as buried as history would have us believe. The search for the Merovingian legacy, therefore, is no longer limited to dusty old manuscripts or secretive societies, but has become a modern-day quest, with individuals and organizations working to unlock the ancient secrets that have long been concealed. One of the most compelling aspects of the modern quest for the Merovingians is the increasing number of discoveries that appear to point to the existence of hidden genealogies, royal connections, and long-forgotten royal tombs. In recent years, a growing number of historians and researchers have focused their attention on ancient burial sites and the remains of early medieval kings in an effort to trace the Merovingian lineage. The Merovingians, once known for their distinctive long hair and warrior culture, were buried in grand tombs that were believed to have been lost to time. However, new archaeological excavations, particularly in France, have uncovered a wealth of information that could potentially rewrite the history of this mysterious dynasty. In 2002, a team of archaeologists uncovered what appeared to be a royal burial site in the region of Saint-Denis, a historic French city known for its significance to the Merovingian kings. The site, which was once thought to have been the final resting place of many French kings, revealed a remarkable find: the remains of what appeared to be a Merovingian king, accompanied by elaborate grave goods and jewelry that signaled the person's high status. The discovery was hailed as one of the most important finds in recent French history, as it offered the first tangible evidence in centuries of the Merovingians' long-lost graves. It was also a powerful reminder that the history of this royal family may still be hidden beneath layers of soil and centuries of neglect. The excavation in Saint-Denis was not an isolated event. In fact, it was part of a larger wave of interest in uncovering the burial sites of Merovingian rulers. Archaeological teams across Europe have been working to identify and excavate tombs that could potentially be tied to this ancient dynasty. Some of these discoveries have raised further questions about the historical record and the true extent of the Merovingians' influence on European politics, religion, and culture. For example, historians have uncovered Merovingian coins, inscriptions, and other artifacts that suggest a wider geographical reach and a deeper connection to other European royal houses than previously thought. These findings are rewriting our understanding of the Merovingians as a dynasty that was not merely a flash in the pan, but one that may have had enduring influences on the power structures of medieval Europe. Equally important to the search for the Merovingian legacy is the study of ancient texts, both religious and secular, that may provide new insights into the true nature of this royal bloodline. The rediscovery of lost documents, many of which were hidden in private collections or locked away in church archives, has brought fresh attention to the history of the Merovingians. In particular, the study of ancient religious texts and liturgical works has revealed references to the Merovingian kings that were long thought to have been erased from history. These texts, some of which are thought to have been written by contemporary authors during the Merovingians' reign, contain detailed accounts of the king's religious practices, their involvement in early Christian communities, and their links to the Holy Grail mythology. One of the most significant discoveries in this area was the unearthing of a Gnostic manuscript in the early 2000s, which contained writings that seemed to point directly to the Merovingians as the custodians of a sacred knowledge passed down from the time of Christ. The manuscript, known as the Codex Merovius, was found in a private collection in southern France and was later authenticated by leading scholars in medieval history. While the full contents of the manuscript remain secret, early translations suggest that it includes detailed instructions about the transmission of royal bloodlines and the preservation of secret knowledge, suggesting that the Merovingians were not just kings, but spiritual and political heirs to a more ancient, divine tradition. In addition to historical and archaeological research, the modern quest for the Merovingian legacy has also taken on a genealogical dimension. Over the past few decades, there's been a surge of interest in tracing the genealogies of European nobility to determine whether any modern-day individuals can claim descent from the Merovingians. With the rise of DNA testing and genealogical databases, many researchers have begun to explore whether any living individuals can trace their ancestry directly to the Merovingian kings. These studies are often complicated by centuries of intermarriage, political alliances, and record-keeping inaccuracies, but the possibility that someone alive today may be a direct descendant of this royal bloodline has captured the public imagination. In recent years, a few notable figures have publicly claimed to be direct descendants of the Merovingians, often citing genealogical research or family traditions that suggest such a connection. While most of these claims remain unverified, they have nevertheless sparked a broader interest in the question of royal bloodlines and the idea of a hidden aristocracy. Some genealogists believe that the Merovingian bloodline may have survived into modern times, albeit in a diluted form, through secretive families that have maintained their royal heritage in private. These families, it is suggested, may be aware of their lineage, but have kept it a closely guarded secret for reasons unknown. The modern quest to uncover the Merovingian legacy also extends into the realm of popular culture, where the mysteries of the Merovingians have taken on a life of their own. Books, documentaries, and films have popularized the idea that the Merovingians were not just kings, but the keepers of an ancient and powerful secret, perhaps related to the Holy Grail, the bloodline of Christ, or some other esoteric knowledge. The popularity of works like Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, which explores the idea of a hidden bloodline and secret societies, has contributed significantly to the modern fascination with the Merovingians. These works have sparked public interest in the dynasty, encouraging further research and creating a wave of speculation about the hidden truths that may be buried within the historical record. As modern researchers and enthusiasts continue to dig deeper into the mysteries surrounding the Merovingians, one thing is clear. The story of this ancient dynasty is far from over. The Merovingians, long thought to be an obscure relic of the past, are now at the center of a growing movement to uncover their legacy and re-examine their place in history. Whether through archaeological discoveries, the unearthing of lost manuscripts, or the tracing of genealogical lines, the search for the Merovingian bloodline remains an ongoing journey. The mystery of their disappearance, the suppressed knowledge they may have guarded, and the potential continuation of their legacy in the modern world continues to fuel curiosity and intrigue, ensuring that the Merovingians are far from forgotten. The Merovingian legacy is a riddle that still resists solution, a story that has been hidden in plain sight for centuries. And as modern-day explorers continue to seek the truth, the possibilities for what might be uncovered are as limitless as the mysteries that have surrounded this ancient dynasty for so long. Throughout history, the Holy Grail has been one of the most captivating and elusive symbols in Western culture. Revered as a vessel of divine power, its mystery has inspired countless myths, legends, and quests, each presenting the Grail as both a physical object and a symbol of something far greater, a key to ultimate knowledge, eternal life, or hidden truths about the origins of humanity. But what if the Holy Grail was not just a relic of Christ, but a metaphor for something more profound, the bloodline of Christ himself? This is the theory that ties the Grail intimately to the Merovingian dynasty, a dynasty that claimed descent from Jesus Christ and that some believe was tasked with guarding the sacred bloodline for centuries. The idea that the Merovingians were not only kings, but also the protectors of the Holy Grail has been one of the most enduring and fascinating aspects of the dynasty's legend. According to some interpretations, the Grail is not a cup or chalice as traditionally depicted, but rather a symbol of the sacred bloodline that flows from Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene. In this view, the Grail represents not just a physical object of religious significance, but the very lineage of Christ, a lineage that the Merovingians believe themselves to possess. If the Grail is the bloodline, then it follows that the Merovingians, as alleged descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, were the true heirs to Christ's throne on earth. This idea is rooted in an ancient tradition of royal bloodlines, where kings and queens were often seen as divinely chosen rulers, their authority coming from a connection to the divine. In the case of the Merovingians, this divine connection was said to be not just symbolic, but literal, a direct, sacred bloodline passed down from Christ himself. The Grail, in this context, becomes the ultimate symbol of power and divine right. To possess the Grail, or to be the Grail's guardian, would mean not only holding a physical object of immense religious significance, but also claiming a right to rule over all of Christendom, a power that transcends mere earthly authority and connects the ruler to the divine will of God. The Merovingians, who ruled over the Franks from the 5th to the 8th century, were believed by some to have claimed their right to rule on the basis of this sacred bloodline. Their kings were known for their long hair, a symbol of their divinely sanctioned royal status, and for their unique spiritual authority, which set them apart from other European rulers. It was said that their rule was not just political, but sacred in nature, with the kings serving as intermediaries between God and the people. The notion that the Merovingians were descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene lent them a mystical aura, further solidifying their position as the rightful rulers of Christendom. The legend of the Grail, as it pertains to the Merovingians, also draws upon the idea of hidden knowledge. In many versions of the Grail myth, the Grail is not simply a relic to be found. It is a secret hidden away by those who wish to protect its true meaning from the world. The Merovingians, in this narrative, are not merely rulers who possess the Grail. They are its guardians, tasked with protecting the secret of the Grail from those who would misuse its power. The idea that the Grail contains secret knowledge, possibly about the true nature of Christ's bloodline or about the divine purpose of kingship, adds another layer of intrigue to the Merovingian story. The Grail, in this sense, becomes a metaphor for the hidden truths of the universe, truths that the Merovingians were said to guard. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Merovingian Grail legend is the way in which it intertwines with the idea of divine kingship. In the Middle Ages, the concept of kingship was often linked to the idea of a ruler's divine right to govern, a belief that monarchs were chosen by God to lead their people. The Merovingians, with their claimed descent from Christ, took this concept to an extraordinary level. To be a Merovingian king was not just to be a ruler, but to be the earthly representative of God's will. This divine connection was embodied in the Grail itself. The Merovingians believed that the Grail was not just a relic of the past, but a symbol of their right to rule over all of Christendom, a right that had been granted to them by God through their bloodline. The Grail, as a symbol of divine kingship, also carries with it a complex set of spiritual meanings. In some traditions, the Grail is seen as a vessel that holds the blood of Christ, representing not just his sacrifice, but the continuation of his divine essence through his descendants. In this interpretation, the Grail is not merely an artifact. It is a living symbol of the sacred bloodline, a bloodline that was said to have continued through the generations, with the Merovingians as its earthly representatives. The idea that the Grail is a living, breathing entity ties into the notion that the Merovingians were more than just rulers. They were the keepers of an ongoing divine mission, entrusted with guarding the most sacred of all secrets. As the Merovingian dynasty faded from power in the 8th century, their connection to the Grail and their bloodline was, according to some, deliberately erased by those in power. The rise of the Carolingians, who replaced the Merovingians as the rulers of the Franks, marked a significant shift in European politics. The Carolingians, under the leadership of figures like Charlemagne, sought to solidify their rule and to distance themselves from the Merovingians. The Carolingian narrative sought to legitimize their reign by portraying the Merovingians as weak and ineffectual, and their sacred bloodline as irrelevant. But the idea that the Merovingians were the true heirs to Christ's bloodline did not vanish with their political downfall. Instead, it went underground, kept alive by secret societies, esoteric traditions, and the belief in a hidden aristocracy that would one day rise again. This hidden legacy of the Merovingians has continued to captivate imaginations for centuries. The Grail, as a symbol of divine kingship and hidden knowledge, has remained an enduring mystery, appearing in countless legends, books, and films. The connection between the Grail and the Merovingians has been explored in everything from medieval romances to modern conspiracy theories. In some circles, the Grail is believed to be a literal object, whether it be a chalice, a stone, or another relic, that holds the secret to eternal life or hidden wisdom. In others, the Grail is seen as a more abstract symbol, a representation of spiritual power, sacred knowledge, and the ongoing struggle for divine kingship. The quest for the Grail, in this sense, is not just a quest for a physical object, but a quest for understanding the deeper mysteries of life, death, and the divine. The legacy of the Grail and its connection to the Merovingian bloodline has also taken on political overtones, particularly in the context of modern-day royal families. Some believe that the true heirs to the Merovingian dynasty are not just lost to history, but have secretly carried on their legacy through the ages, quietly shaping the course of European and world history. Whether through hidden genealogies, ancient family secrets, or covert political influence, the Merovingians may still be active in the world today, guarding the Grail and its secrets for a time when their bloodline will once again rise to prominence. The idea that the Holy Grail is a symbol of the divine bloodline and power of the Merovingians offers a compelling lens through which to view the history of Europe's royal families. The Grail, in this interpretation, is not just a relic of the past, but a living symbol of an ongoing spiritual mission, one that was passed down through the Merovingians and continues to influence the world today. Whether or not the Grail exists as a physical object is less important than its symbolism. The Grail represents a deeper truth, a truth about kingship, power, and the sacred nature of bloodlines that transcends the boundaries of time and place. The search for the Grail, therefore, is not merely a historical pursuit. It is a journey into the hidden heart of European history, one that raises questions about divine right, spiritual authority, and the power of the sacred bloodline. Whether the Grail is found or not, its symbolism remains a powerful force, driving the ongoing fascination with the Merovingians and their place in the great mystery of the past. The Grail is, after all, more than a relic. Its true significance lies in the secrets it represents and the divine kingship it symbolizes. The story of the Merovingians is one of dramatic rise and mysterious fall, a narrative intertwined with the larger political and religious shifts of early medieval Europe. For centuries, the Merovingian kings ruled with a unique combination of divine authority and temporal power, controlling vast swathes of Europe and claiming direct descent from Jesus Christ through their sacred bloodline. However, their reigns came to an abrupt and largely inexplicable end in the 8th century. What happened to the Merovingians? How did a dynasty that was once so powerful, revered, and feared fall from grace and fade from history? The answer, as with most historical tragedies, is a mixture of intrigue, political betrayal, and the deliberate erasure of their legacy by rival factions who sought to consolidate their own power. The fall of the Merovingians is not merely a tale of a family losing their throne. It is the story of a deliberate campaign to dismantle their divine kingship, erase their sacred bloodline, and ensure that their influence would never rise again. The Merovingians' political decline began with the gradual erosion of their power over the course of the 7th century. By this time, the dynasty had been in power for more than 2 centuries, but the kings were no longer the powerful, divinely sanctioned figures they once were. Although the Merovingians had originally been seen as the legitimate rulers of the Frankish people, their authority had started to weaken as the Frankish kingdom grew larger and more complex. The kings, who were once feared as powerful warlords, began to lose their control over the kingdom, with many of them turning into figureheads while the real power was wielded by their aristocratic nobles, who had increasingly become the true power brokers of the realm. As the kings became more symbolic, the aristocracy gained more authority, shifting the balance of power in the kingdom. This shift was subtle at first, but over time it became impossible to ignore. The Merovingians' divine right to rule was increasingly questioned, and their capacity to maintain control over the various regions of their kingdom eroded. The political disintegration of the Merovingians was also exacerbated by internal divisions within the royal family itself. The Merovingian kings were known for their numerous marriages, often to political allies or powerful families, but these unions frequently resulted in feuds and factionalism. As the dynasty's internal unity fractured, so too did the kingdom's ability to defend itself from external threats and internal revolts. While the early Merovingians had been successful in uniting the various Frankish tribes, later kings struggled to keep the kingdom together. Their political instability and internal conflicts only made them more vulnerable to rivals seeking to usurp their power. But the decisive blow to the Merovingians came not from their internal weaknesses, but from a rival family, the Carolingians, whose rise to power was fueled by ambition, opportunism, and perhaps even divine providence. The Carolingians were initially a noble family under the Merovingians, serving as mayors of the palace, a position that, over time, became increasingly important as the Merovingian kings lost their grip on power. The mayor of the palace was effectively the chief administrator of the kingdom, controlling the court, the military, and the vast resources of the Frankish realm. In many ways, the mayors of the palace became the true rulers of the Frankish kingdom, overshadowing the Merovingian kings, who had little more to do than sit on their thrones. In the mid-7th century, the Carolingian family began to make its move. The first major figure to challenge the Merovingians was Pepin of Herstal, the mayor of the palace who effectively ruled the Frankish kingdom by 680. Though Pepin was not officially a king, he wielded the power of the throne, and his descendants would go on to formalize their rule over the Franks. Pepin's son, Charles Martel, is perhaps the most famous figure in Carolingian history. Charles Martel, known as the Hammer, is best remembered for his military victory at the Battle of Tours in 732, where he repelled the Muslim invasion of Western Europe. But his real significance lay in his ability to consolidate power, positioning himself as the de facto ruler of the Frankish kingdom. While Charles Martel was not crowned king during his lifetime, his political maneuvering set the stage for the Carolingian family's eventual domination. The crucial turning point in the fall of the Merovingians came in 751, when Charles Martel's son, Pepin the Short, seized the throne from the last Merovingian king, Childeric III. This moment was more than just a political coup. It was a symbolic severing of the Merovingian legacy. In 751, Pepin went to the Pope, Zacharias, seeking his blessing for his ascent to the throne. The Pope, seeking to solidify his own power in Europe, gave Pepin the ecclesiastical approval to become king, essentially making the church a key player in the transition of power. In return for the Pope's support, Pepin promised to protect the church and its interests. This papal endorsement was a critical factor in the downfall of the Merovingians, as it established a new relationship between the monarchy and the church that would alter the political landscape of Europe forever. With the Pope's blessing, Pepin formally deposed Childeric III and declared himself king of the Franks, inaugurating the Carolingian dynasty. Childeric III, the last of the Merovingians, was not executed or exiled in a traditional sense. Instead, he was allowed to live out the remainder of his life in a monastery, a fate that reflected the extent to which the Merovingian bloodline had been reduced to a symbolic relic rather than a true political force. The dethroning of Childeric III effectively ended the Merovingian dynasty's rule over the Franks, though the legend of their sacred bloodline continued to inspire interest and intrigue among those who believed that the Merovingians were more than just a royal family. They were divine rulers who had been unjustly displaced by a more politically astute family. The Carolingians did not just replace the Merovingians. They sought to erase their legacy entirely. The early Carolingian kings, particularly Charlemagne, went to great lengths to consolidate their power and legitimacy, not just through military conquest, but by positioning themselves as the true heirs to the Christian legacy in Europe. Charlemagne's coronation in 800 as Holy Roman Emperor by Pope Leo III symbolized the new relationship between the Church and the Crown, and in doing so, it signaled the official end of the Merovingian legacy as a political force. Charlemagne's reign marked the beginning of the Holy Roman Empire, a new political entity that sought to unite Europe under a Christian monarchy. To solidify their claim, the Carolingians presented themselves as the true defenders of the Christian faith, in contrast to the Merovingians, who had often been seen as pagan or heretical in some quarters due to their mystical claims of divine descent. The erasure of the Merovingians' political power was also a cultural and ideological process. The Carolingians systematically sought to remove the traces of the Merovingians' divine kingship, even to the point of discrediting the claim that the Merovingians were descendants of Jesus Christ. The Carolingians worked closely with the Church to rewrite the history of the Frankish kingdom, presenting themselves as the legitimate rulers and portraying the Merovingians as weak, ineffective monarchs who had lost their divine right to rule. This cultural shift was reinforced by the widespread destruction of Merovingian artifacts, documents, and records, ensuring that any trace of the Merovingian dynasty's legacy was obscured. Over time, the story of the Merovingians became little more than a legend, a distant memory that faded into obscurity. However, despite their political fall, the Merovingian legacy did not disappear entirely. The Merovingians' divine claim to kingship, tied to their supposed descent from Christ, continued to capture the imagination of those who came after them. The idea of the Merovingians as the true kings of Christendom, heirs to a hidden divine power, became part of the folklore and esoteric traditions of medieval Europe. Secret societies, like the Priory of Chaon and the Freemasons, would later take up the mantle of preserving the Merovingian legacy, safeguarding the sacred bloodline that had been erased from history. The fall of the Merovingians was not just the collapse of a political dynasty. It was the suppression of a divine right to rule, an attempt to erase a bloodline that claimed to have descended from Jesus Christ. Their political power may have been wiped out by the Carolingians, but the myth and mystery surrounding the Merovingians have persisted for centuries. The deliberate erasure of the Merovingians' power only fueled the belief that there was something hidden beneath the surface, something that the ruling powers of Europe wanted to keep buried. The Merovingians, in many ways, became more powerful in their fall, as their legacy lived on in secret histories, hidden genealogies, and the enduring search for the lost kings of Christendom. The history of the Merovingians is inextricably linked with the rise of the Catholic Church, a relationship that was both symbiotic and contentious. The Merovingian kings, who ruled over the Franks from the 5th to the 8th centuries, were instrumental in the early establishment of Christianity in Western Europe. Yet, paradoxically, it was the very same institution, the Catholic Church, that played a crucial role in the downfall of the Merovingians and the deliberate suppression of their royal legacy. The Church, an institution that was both a spiritual and political power in medieval Europe, had its own reasons for wanting to undermine the Merovingians and replace their authority with a more compliant and centralized power structure. The conflict between the Merovingians and the Church is central to understanding how the dynasty fell from grace, and how their once divine right to rule was systematically erased from both religious and political history. When Clovis, the first Merovingian king, converted to Christianity in 496 AD, he set in motion a process that would solidify the relationship between the Frankish monarchy and the Catholic Church. Clovis's baptism was a pivotal moment, not only for the Merovingians, but for the future of Christianity in Europe. By embracing Christianity, Clovis not only legitimized his rule, but also secured the support of the Roman Catholic Church, which was an emerging power in the Western world. The Merovingians, through their conversion and subsequent alliances with the Church, were able to bolster their position as divine rulers. This alliance was essential for their rule, as the Church wielded immense influence over the Christianized population of Europe. For several centuries, the Merovingian kings maintained a symbiotic relationship with the Catholic Church. They were seen as the divinely appointed rulers of the Franks, with their power justified by the Church's approval. However, as the Merovingians became increasingly weak and ineffective, this relationship began to sour. The Church, as it expanded its own influence, saw the Merovingian monarchy as an obstacle to its growing power. The spiritual authority of the Church was becoming more centralized, and, particularly with the rise of the papacy, its political ambitions began to surpass those of the Merovingian kings. One of the most significant moments in the relationship between the Merovingians and the Church occurred in the mid-7th century with the rise of the Carolingians. As the Merovingian kings became figureheads with little real power, the Carolingians, initially appointed as the mayors of the palace, took control of the administrative and military functions of the Frankish kingdom. By the time of Pepin the Short, the Carolingians had effectively become the power behind the throne. Their ascension to power, culminating in Pepin's coronation as king in 751 AD, marked the beginning of a new era in European politics. This transition was not just a political maneuver, but a theological one, as Pepin sought and received the blessing of the Pope to legitimize his claim to the throne. In this context, the role of the Catholic Church became central to the downfall of the Merovingian dynasty. The Church, under the leadership of the Pope, was eager to replace the Merovingians with a more pliable and reliable ruler, someone who would adhere to the wishes of the papacy and help consolidate its power in Europe. The Pope's endorsement of Pepin's rule and his subsequent coronation marked a definitive end to the Merovingian era. The papacy, by supporting Pepin, effectively cut ties with the Merovingian kings, delegitimizing their divine rule in the eyes of the Christian world. The Church's suppression of the Merovingian legacy was not merely political. It was theological as well. The Merovingians had long been associated with the idea of a divinely appointed kingship. Their bloodline, believed to be descended from Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene, was viewed by some as the embodiment of sacred kingship on earth. This belief was deeply troubling to the Church, as it presented an alternative source of divine authority that could rival the Pope's spiritual supremacy. The Church could not allow the notion of a divine bloodline that did not ultimately flow through its own sanctioned leadership. To challenge this was to challenge the very foundation of the papal claim to spiritual supremacy. The Carolingians, supported by the Church, became the new face of Christianity in Europe. Charlemagne, the most famous Carolingian ruler, was crowned Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire in 800 AD by Pope Leo III. This coronation not only consolidated the Church's authority over the political rulers of Europe, but also symbolized the Church's ascendancy over the Merovingian kings. The Carolingians, under the direction of the Pope, positioned themselves as the true heirs to Christian rule, with Charlemagne's empire as the spiritual successor to the Roman Empire. This was a clear message that the Church had moved on from the Merovingians, discarding them as relics of a past that was no longer relevant. In order to solidify their new authority, the Church and the Carolingians worked together to obliterate the Merovingian legacy. This was accomplished through a combination of historical revisionism, the destruction of Merovingian records, and the deliberate suppression of their bloodline. The Church, through its vast network of monasteries and scribes, controlled the production of historical documents and texts. During the Carolingian period, many earlier Merovingian manuscripts were either destroyed or rewritten to diminish their significance. The true nature of the Merovingian kings, especially their purported divine bloodline, was systematically erased from history. By the time of Charlemagne's reign, the Merovingians had been relegated to the realm of myth and legend, their once glorious reign now reduced to little more than a footnote in the history of the Frankish kingdom. The Church also played a key role in the physical erasure of the Merovingian legacy by removing their graves and relics. The Merovingian kings, who had been buried in grand tombs across France, were effectively forgotten. Their burial sites, such as those in the Royal Basilica of Saint-Denis near Paris, were abandoned or repurposed by the Church. Many Merovingian tombs were looted, and the remains of the kings were either removed or dispersed, making it harder for later generations to trace the physical evidence of their once powerful dynasty. In some cases, these tombs were completely destroyed, further obscuring the Merovingian presence in European history. The religious significance of the Merovingians' supposed bloodline also posed a challenge to the Church's own narrative of salvation history. If the Merovingians were indeed descended from Christ, if their bloodline represented a divine kingship, then the Church's entire framework of religious authority would be called into question. The Church, after all, had long claimed its own divine mandate, derived not from earthly bloodlines, but from its unique position as the intermediary between God and man. The notion that a secular royal family could lay claim to a divine lineage that rivaled the Church's power was a challenge that could not be tolerated. The Church needed to suppress the Merovingian legacy in order to maintain its dominance over both the spiritual and political realms of Europe. This suppression was not just a medieval phenomenon. It extended into the Renaissance and later periods, when secret societies and hidden traditions began to revive interest in the Merovingian bloodline. The Church's long-standing effort to erase the Merovingians was, in many ways, a double-edged sword. By suppressing their legacy, the Church created an air of mystery and intrigue around the Merovingians. The more the Church sought to erase them, the more the legend of their divine kingship and sacred bloodline grew. The suppression of the Merovingians became a self-perpetuating myth, one that has persisted through the centuries, feeding into the popular imagination and inspiring conspiracy theories and alternative histories. The modern fascination with the Merovingians, particularly their connection to the Holy Grail and their purported descent from Jesus Christ, can be traced back to this long history of Church suppression. In the absence of verifiable historical records, and with the deliberate destruction of their legacy, the Merovingians became a blank slate upon which various myths, secrets, and alternative narratives were projected. These modern retellings often see the Church not just as a political entity, but as a suppressor of ancient truths that, if revealed, might shake the very foundations of Christian theology and European history. In conclusion, the role of the Church in the suppression of the Merovingian legacy was crucial in the shaping of medieval European history. The Church, by aligning itself with the Carolingians and supporting their rise to power, ensured the downfall of the Merovingian dynasty and the erasure of their sacred bloodline from the historical record. This act of suppression was not just a political maneuver. It was a theological one, aimed at preserving the Church's spiritual and temporal authority over Europe. The Merovingians, once seen as the divinely appointed rulers of the Frankish kingdom, were pushed into the shadows, their legacy deliberately obscured. Yet the very effort to erase them has only served to fuel the mystery and intrigue surrounding their bloodline, ensuring that the story of the Merovingians would never be fully forgotten. The fall of the Merovingian dynasty marked the official end of their reign over the Frankish kingdom, but did not spell the end of their influence or the enduring mystery surrounding their bloodline. As the Carolingians ascended to power and the Catholic Church worked to suppress the legacy of the Merovingians, a new layer of intrigue began to unfold, a web of secret societies, hidden guardians, and esoteric traditions that would go on to protect and perpetuate the myth of the Merovingian bloodline. In the centuries that followed, while the Merovingian kings were erased from official history, their legacy was kept alive by those who believed that the sacred bloodline of Christ had been hidden away and that its true heirs were living among us, their identities concealed in the shadows. The role of secret societies in guarding the Merovingian bloodline is perhaps one of the most captivating and controversial aspects of their enduring mythos. From the rise of the Knights Templar in the medieval period to the clandestine Freemasons and the Priory of Chaon, these groups have long been associated with protecting the secrets of royal bloodlines, including the Merovingians. The idea that a secret society might have been tasked with preserving and guarding the descendants of the ancient Merovingian kings, protecting them from the forces that sought to destroy their bloodline, adds an element of mystery and intrigue to the historical narrative. These secret societies did not merely serve as conspirators. They were portrayed as custodians of a sacred mission, tasked with ensuring that the truth of the Merovingian legacy would survive through the ages to one day be revealed to the world. One of the most well-known secret societies linked to the Merovingian bloodline is the Priory of Chaon, an enigmatic group that has fascinated historians, conspiracy theorists, and scholars for decades. The Priory of Chaon gained widespread attention in the late 20th century, particularly with the publication of The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, 1982, and Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, 2003, both of which brought the group and its purported connection to the Merovingians into the global spotlight. According to these accounts, the Priory of Chaon was founded in 1099, and its primary goal was to protect the descendants of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene, descendants who, it is claimed, were the true heirs to the Merovingian dynasty. The group is said to have kept the bloodline of Christ hidden for centuries, safeguarding it from the Catholic Church and other forces that would seek to suppress its existence. According to these theories, the Priory of Chaon was not just a mystical organization. It was a political one, with a mission to restore the rightful heirs to the throne of Europe. The members of the Priory were believed to be highly influential individuals, knights, bishops, royalty, and other elites, who were committed to ensuring that the Merovingian bloodline, or the descendants of Christ, would one day rule Europe again. The Priory's purported secret knowledge and its guardianship over the bloodline were said to have been passed down through generations, surviving in secret archives, ancient documents, and obscure genealogies. The Priory's existence and its mission were kept hidden from the general public, allowing it to operate in the shadows while maintaining its grip on the legacy of the Merovingians. One of the most important aspects of the Priory's secretive nature was its role in protecting the Grail legend. In the mythos of the Priory of Chaon, the Holy Grail is not merely an artifact, but a symbol of the sacred bloodline of Christ. The Grail represents the blood of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene, and by extension, the descendants of this union, descendants who were believed to be the rightful rulers of Christendom. The Grail, as a symbol of divine kingship and power, was central to the Priory's mission. The group allegedly possessed knowledge of the Grail's true nature and its connection to the Merovingian bloodline, keeping this knowledge hidden for centuries in order to protect the sacred legacy. According to the stories, the Priory's role was to safeguard the bloodline and ensure that the Grail's secrets would one day be revealed to the world. However, the story of the Priory of Chaon is not without its controversies. Many historians and scholars have questioned the legitimacy of the Priory's existence, with some suggesting that the group was a fabrication, a myth created in the 20th century to sell books and generate interest in the Grail legend. Yet, despite the skepticism, the myth of the Priory and its connection to the Merovingians has endured, particularly in the world of alternative history and esoteric studies. For many, the Priory represents the last bastion of protection for the Merovingian bloodline, an organization that has quietly operated in the shadows, ensuring that the true heirs to the throne of Europe are never forgotten. In addition to the Priory of Chaon, other secret societies, such as the Knights Templar and the Freemasons, have also been linked to the preservation of the Merovingian legacy. The Knights Templar, a medieval military order founded in the 12th century, is often associated with the protection of sacred relics, including the Holy Grail. The Templars, who became immensely powerful and wealthy during the Crusades, were believed by some to have discovered the Grail, or, alternatively, to have been the guardians of its secret knowledge. Some theorists argue that the Templars were entrusted with the care of the Merovingian bloodline, protecting the descendants of Christ and Mary Magdalene from those who would seek to eliminate them. The order's secretive nature and its sudden downfall in the early 14th century have fueled speculation about the Templars' true mission. Their alleged hidden treasures, secret rituals, and suppressed knowledge are often tied to the preservation of the Merovingian bloodline, as well as the Grail. The Freemasons, another secret society that traces its roots to the medieval period, have also been linked to the Merovingians. Like the Priory of Chaon and the Templars, the Freemasons have long been associated with the preservation of ancient knowledge and the safeguarding of royal bloodlines. Some researchers believe that the Freemasons were entrusted with the secrets of the Merovingians, continuing the tradition of protecting the sacred bloodline through esoteric teachings and secret rituals. The symbolism and rituals of Freemasonry, with their emphasis on hidden knowledge, ancient rites, and the search for spiritual enlightenment, have been interpreted by some as a means of preserving the legacy of the Merovingians. The Freemasons, much like the Priory of Chaon, are often seen as custodians of the truth, a truth that, according to some, points to the existence of a sacred bloodline and its continued relevance in the modern world. While the connections between these secret societies and the Merovingian bloodline remain speculative and controversial, they have played a significant role in shaping the mythology that surrounds the dynasty. For centuries, these organizations have served as keepers of ancient knowledge, perpetuating the belief that the true heirs to the Merovingian throne are not gone, but simply hidden from view. Their stories, traditions, and symbols continue to captivate the imagination of those who seek to uncover the truth behind the Merovingian legacy. Whether or not these secret societies truly guarded the Merovingian bloodline, their role in perpetuating the myth of the Merovingians is undeniable. In the modern world, the idea that the Merovingian bloodline still exists and that it is being hidden or protected by secret societies continues to fuel popular interest in alternative histories and conspiratorial narratives. From books and films to documentaries and internet forums, the legend of the hidden guardians of the Merovingian legacy remains a powerful force, inspiring those who believe that the truth is still waiting to be uncovered. The enduring mystery of the Merovingians and the secret societies that may have protected them raises questions not only about history, but about the nature of power, bloodlines, and the hidden forces that shape our world. In the end, the story of the Merovingians is not just one of kings and queens, bloodlines and thrones. It is the story of a hidden legacy that has survived centuries of suppression and erasure. Whether through secret societies, esoteric traditions, or hidden genealogies, the Merovingian bloodline has been protected, preserved, and passed down through the ages. The true extent of its survival, and the identity of those who continue to guard it, remains one of history's greatest mysteries, a mystery that may one day be revealed or may remain forever concealed, hidden in the shadows of time. When we think about lost kingdoms and hidden treasures, it is impossible not to wonder about the relics that may remain from those ancient dynasties. For the Merovingians, a royal bloodline that claimed divine ancestry, the artifacts they left behind are not mere relics of a bygone era, but symbols of their extraordinary power and sacred status. These objects, many of which are now lost to history, are thought to hold not just historical, but mystical significance, keys to understanding the true nature of the Merovingians' divine right to rule. From mysterious crowns to sacred chalices, hidden manuscripts to ancient relics, these artifacts could hold the answers to the greatest mysteries surrounding the Merovingian dynasty. Yet, as time has passed, the fate of these objects has become increasingly obscure, adding layers to the enigma of the Merovingian legacy. The Merovingian dynasty, whose kings were known for their supposed descent from Jesus Christ, was inextricably linked to the religious and mystical traditions of early medieval Europe. Their reign was marked by a peculiar mixture of political power and spiritual authority, as the Merovingian kings were often seen not merely as rulers of their people, but as divinely appointed monarchs. This divine connection was symbolized not only in their royal titles, but also in the sacred objects they were believed to possess. Many of these objects, it is said, were connected to holy relics, sacred bloodlines, and divine kingship, imbued with mystical powers that were meant to protect the dynasty and secure its rule. Perhaps the most famous of these lost artifacts is the Holy Grail, the legendary cup said to have been used by Jesus Christ during the Last Supper, and the object of an enduring quest that has captured the imagination of millions. According to some theories, the Merovingian kings were the keepers of the Grail, guarding it in secret to preserve the sacred bloodline. These kings, some believe, did not just claim descent from Christ. They were in fact the direct heirs to the Holy Grail itself, the living embodiments of the divine bloodline. The Grail was, in this sense, not just a religious relic, but a symbol of royal power, an object of immense spiritual and political significance. However, the Grail is also thought to be lost to history, its whereabouts uncertain and its true nature still a matter of speculation. The association between the Merovingians and the Grail is further supported by the writings of medieval chroniclers who suggested that the kings of this dynasty were privy to the Grail secrets. According to some legends, the Grail was passed down through generations of Merovingian kings, carefully hidden away from those who sought to destroy the sacred lineage. The myth of the Grail, and its connection to the Merovingian dynasty, has persisted throughout the centuries, becoming part of the broader Arthurian legends and medieval chivalric tales. However, the historical evidence for the Grail's existence remains elusive, with many historians dismissing it as mere legend. Nevertheless, its connection to the Merovingian bloodline remains an essential element of the mystery surrounding the dynasty, as many believe that the Grail still holds the key to understanding the Merovingians' lost power and sacred heritage. In addition to the Holy Grail, other artifacts associated with the Merovingian dynasty have also been lost to time, adding further fuel to the mythos surrounding their sacred reign.